pray. Jesus even talks about in Matthew 6:5, standing in a posture of prayer, but not doing it to be seen of men. He says, don't be like the hypocrites who stand in order to be seen by men. Well, here's one of those hypocrites. Not wrong to stand, but to stand to be seen by men. Again, you go back to the issue of the heart. Very likely he would take his place in a most visible location and nearest to the holy place that he could get to show his proximity to God. He wants to be wherever God is believed or deemed to be, to give the unwashed around him a good look at a truly righteous man. He takes his posture there. You see not only his posture, one of self-promoting pride, but you see here his prayer. And this is an interesting statement. He was praying to himself. Praying this to himself. That can have two possible meanings. One, he was inaudibly praying. When you say you're talking to yourself, you probably mean you're talking so nobody else can hear you. That is possible, but not likely, that he was just mumbling and moving his lips like Hannah in 1 Samuel 1, a kind of a private, personal soliloquy. It's unlikely that that is the idea here, and the construction lends itself better to understand that he was actually directing his prayer in a self-congratulatory fashion. And that is fairly well indicated by the fact that in 2 verses he refers to himself 5 times. That's pretty hard to do. You have to have short sentences and a lot of first-person pronouns. This is a self-congratulatory prayer, and the translation of the NAS is a good translation. The Pharisee stood and was thus praying to himself. He is parading himself. This is no prayer to God. He gives God no praise. He asks nothing from God, no mercy, no grace, no forgiveness, no help, but he does refer to God. God, because you're supposed to, that's the way all prayer is supposed to begin. I thank you that I'm not like other people. Wow. Well, what's there to thank God for? You've done this on your own. This is sheer hypocrisy. This is an unequivocal confession to God of his worthiness, of his righteousness. Thanking God for what you are on your own? This is where self-righteousness leads you. I'm good enough. God, I thank you that I'm good enough. I'm good enough to have a relationship with you. I'm good enough to be here in your temple. I'm good enough to be standing by this holy place. I'm good enough to be the paragon of religious righteousness and virtue. I'm good enough to stand here so all the lowlifes can see what a really godly man looks like. My guess is that the intent of our Lord is to say that he prayed in the direction of himself in a self-congratulatory prayer, probably audibly, since typically Jewish people did pray audibly. The only prohibition the rabbis give is that you are to pray audibly but not to yell. But he is really putting on a demonstration. And so everybody gets the message, and so God can truly appreciate his achievement. He gets specific. And the way all self-righteous people do, he compares himself to the worst. So he says, I'm not like other people, swindlers. Arpax is the Greek word. It's robbers. Robbers. Unjust. Adikos, meaning cheaters, dishonest. Adulterers, moikos, immoral, sexual sinners. I'm not like that. And by the way, those are all categories of people who fit into the association of the tax collectors. Tax collectors and the assorted sinners and prostitutes that were part of the low life of society. So he compares himself to the people he despises, the lowliest of the people he despises. All those kinds of sins associated with tax collectors and their companions. And then at the moment he sees a good illustration of exactly the kind of person he is not, and so he says, or even like this tax gatherer. Now that's that obnoxious self-righteousness. He's praying to himself, putting on a demonstration for people that he thinks God is also impressed with. Asks nothing from God, seeks nothing from God, needs nothing from God. He just wants people to hear what a truly righteous man is like. And he must have kept himself a little bit of distance away. if he were to brush against any Amharitz, he would be unclean. And physical isolation for a Pharisee was a statement. They stood aloof from others when they gathered around the altar. They stood aloof from others at all time in society. They never had a dinner or a lunch at their house with anybody but another Pharisee unless they invited somebody in which to trap Jesus. But his prayer is not complete in saying what he's not. He wants to let you know and let God know and let everybody else know what he is. He is not only not immoral, he is very religious. He qualifies on both counts. He is moral and religious. How religious is he? Verse 12. I fast twice a week. Impressive, huh? By the way, the Old Testament only prescribed one fast. Day of Atonement, preparation for the Day of Atonement. Leviticus 16:31 called for a fast. There are no other required fasts. There were times of sorrow, times of penitence, times of mourning when people fasted, and that was something you could choose to do. But there was only one prescribed fast. But as I said, these self-styled, self-righteous, external legalists like to invent rituals and ceremonies, as all false religions do. And they get more complicated and more complicated and more complicated and more symbolic in direct proportion to the absence of truth and reality. And so, they had developed a scheme of fasting on Monday and Thursday. Monday and Thursday. Why Monday and Thursday? Because those were the market days and the crowds were bigger. So you could go into the big crowd and throw a bunch of ashes on your head and look sad and fast. Spiritual impression would be made. And why Monday and Thursday? Some other writers say, well, because it was a Monday, according to some rabbi, that Moses went up to Sinai and 40 days later he came down on a Thursday. So Monday and Thursday. Some other rabbi offers this explanation: because Monday and Thursday are equidistant from the Sabbath while being as far from each other as possible. So in all these little twisted, convoluted things, they had developed a way to make a fair show in the flesh. That's what Paul says in Galatians 6:12. And fasting was part of it. Jesus condemned that, remember, in the 6th chapter in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, don't fast like the hypocrites, fast in the public streets and in the corners, calling attention to yourself. He's talking exactly about this. People putting on external spiritual displays by ritualistic ceremonial behavior, by the clothing they wear, the garb, the way they dress, as if this is the mark of real holiness. Further, he says, I pay tithes of all that I get. I pay tithes of all that I get. The Old Testament laid down prescription for tithing. 10% of what you get goes to fund the national theocratic government. 10% goes